In the heart of Kentucky Ridge, 1873, life moved slowly, like the fog that hugged the hills each morning. Families tended their farms, smoke curled from chimneys, and the only news came from word of mouth. But atop the highest hill stood Bellwood Chapel, a small wooden church with peeling white paint and a tall, proud steeple. Its bell had a strange reputation. It tolled before someone in town died. Folks whispered about it around hearths and at the general store. Some called it cursed. Others said it was a divine warning. And yet no one dared climb the hill at night to see it for themselves. 12-year-old Thomas Harper, his hair tousled and eyes wide with curiosity, had grown up listening to these stories. While other children played in the fields, he would sneak to the hill at sunset, staring at the chapel, wondering what secret it held. That evening he whispered to himself, "I'll see it someday. I'll know the truth." That night, Thomas sat by the fireplace in the small Harper cabin. The warm glow illuminated the lined face of his grandfather, Amos Harper, a man whose hands had tilled these hills for decades. "Grandpapa," Thomas asked, "why does the bell ring before someone dies?" Amos sighed and poked at the fire. "Every time that bell rings, Tom, it's a reminder. Life is fragile, and death, well, it comes whether we are ready or not." Thomas's curiosity flared. "But how does the bell know?" Amos shook his head slowly. "Some things aren't meant to be understood, boy. They're meant to be felt. Felt with your heart, not your head." Thomas lay awake that night, the image of the steeple etched in his mind. The bell's call, he realized, wasn't just sound. It was something deeper, something that could touch even the living. It was early May when a stranger rode into town. A tall man in black, with a leather satchel slung over his shoulder, his face marked by a quiet intensity. He introduced himself as Reverend Eli Whitmore, claiming he would stay at Bellwood Chapel to minister to the Ridge folk. The townspeople eyed him warily. They were simple folk, suspicious of outsiders. But Thomas felt drawn to the stranger, as if his arrival was no coincidence. The Reverend spoke softly to Thomas one afternoon while passing the fields. "You're curious, aren't you, Thomas?" the man asked. "Yes, sir," Thomas admitted, staring down at the dusty road. The Reverend nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Curiosity is a gift, but some truths are heavier than a boy's shoulders can carry. Remember that." Life in Kentucky Ridge continued its slow rhythm until one evening the bell tolled. Not once, not twice, but three deep, resonant strikes that echoed across the hills. Birds scattered, and even the wind seemed to pause. The townspeople froze, exchanging uneasy glances. That very night, old Mrs. Carver, who lived alone on the western slope, passed away quietly in her sleep. Thomas had been on the hill, watching the bell swing against the crimson sunset. His heart skipped a beat. The stories were true. The bell had called, and now death had followed. After Mrs. Carver's passing, Thomas could barely eat or sleep. What if the bell rang for someone he loved? Could he bear it? At breakfast, he asked his mother, Mary Harper, "Mama, what if it rings for Grandpapa?" Mary frowned, brushing flour from her hands. "It's just superstition, Tom. Don't let it trouble your mind." But Thomas wasn't convinced. He spent the next few nights lying awake, listening for the faint echo of the bell over the hills. That sound, once mysterious, now carried a weight that pressed against his chest. The next day, Thomas could no longer resist. He climbed the steep path to Bellwood Chapel, his boots crunching on loose stones. Reverend Whitmore was there, tending to the small garden in front of the church. "Thomas," the Reverend said with a gentle smile, "some things are not meant to be uncovered too soon." "I have to know," Thomas said firmly, eyes wide. "Why does the bell ring before someone dies?" The Reverend studied him for a moment, then sighed. Very well. But remember, some truths are heavy. Thomas climbed the wooden steps to the belfry, peering at the enormous bell. Its surface was worn with age, and faint gold letters glimmered in the sunlight. Ring not for fear, but for love. Thomas's eyes widened. Love? Could a bell truly ring for love? Reverend Whitmore placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. The bell, he said softly, doesn't predict death. It senses it. It feels the hearts of those near the end and calls the community to gather, to witness life, to offer comfort. Thomas blinked. So, it's not evil? No, the Reverend replied. It's a reminder, a call to act with love, not fear. People think it's cursed, but it is a blessing. It teaches the living how to be human, how to care. Thomas stared at the bell, imagining it tolling over the ridge folk, not as a harbinger of doom, but as a beacon of connection. A week later, Thomas's grandmother, Eliza Harper, fell gravely ill. Her cheeks were pale and her breathing shallow. The family gathered at her bedside, whispering prayers and stories from long ago. Thomas felt a familiar chill in the air, the same stillness that preceded the bell's tolls. Would it ring for her? Could he bear it? His small hands trembled as he held hers, remembering Reverend Whitmore's words about love. As the sun dipped behind the western ridge, the bell rang, 3 solemn tolls, echoing down the hills like a heartbeat. Thomas's mother held him close, whispering, "It's not an end, Thomas. It's a beginning." The townspeople soon gathered at the Harper house. They prayed, shared food, and offered comfort. Thomas saw neighbors hug, children offer flowers, and even the sternest men shed quiet tears. That night, Thomas realized the bell did not bring fear. It brought the community together. Love was louder than death. Later, unable to sleep, Thomas sneaked to the chapel. The Reverend was there, sitting quietly beneath the bell, the night wind rustling the trees. "Why are you awake, child?" he asked. Thomas explained his fears, his questions, and his growing understanding. Reverend Whitmore nodded slowly. Every bell toll reminds us that we are bound by more than blood, by kindness, care, and presence. Death isn't the enemy. It is a teacher, Thomas. It teaches hearts to act, to love, and to connect while we still can. Thomas stayed there, under the shadow of the bell, listening to its gentle creak in the night, feeling the weight and warmth of its lesson settle in his heart. One late afternoon, a stranger rode into the ridge on a horse that had seen many roads. He introduced himself as Nathaniel Gray, a traveling historian who had heard tales of Bellwood Chapel's mysterious bell. His eyes were sharp, almost haunted. "I've studied bells all my life," Nathaniel said, addressing Thomas and a small gathering of townspeople. "Some are made to inspire, some to warn. But this bell, it was forged with intention, not to predict death, but to call the living to love and compassion before it is too late." Thomas's eyes widened. "So, it's not magic?" Nathaniel smiled faintly. "Not in the way you think. The magic is in people, how they respond when the bell calls. That is where its true power lies." Thomas spent the following weeks by Reverend Whitmore's side, visiting the sick, the elderly, and the lonely. He carried water, cooked meals, and held hands in quiet comfort. Slowly, he saw the truth in the Reverend's teachings. The bell was not a warning. It was a guidepost for humanity. When he helped old Mr. Douglas carry firewood up the hill, or when he read to little Clara Bates while her mother worked, Thomas realized that small acts of care could echo far beyond the ridge. Each time the bell tolled, he didn't feel fear, he felt responsibility. The tragedy struck one cold morning when Lily Carr, a spirited 10-year-old, lost her father in a mining accident. The bell tolled, echoing across the ridge with its deep, solemn rhythm. Thomas ran to Lily's home, finding her sitting on the floor, clutching her father's worn hat. Her mother wept quietly beside her. Thomas knelt and said, "He loved you. He's still with you, in every heartbeat, in every memory." The community soon gathered, singing hymns and telling stories of Lily's father. Thomas understood that the bell had not brought fear. It had brought connection, solace, and shared grief. As news of the bell spread beyond Kentucky Ridge, travelers arrived to witness it. What struck them most was not its eerie reputation, but how the townspeople came together whenever it tolled. Neighbors who had barely spoken now shared food. Children learned to comfort the grieving. Families held vigil together. The chapel became more than a building. It became a living symbol of community, love, and compassion, all guided by the rhythm of the bell. One crisp autumn morning, Thomas's best friend, Samuel, fell gravely ill. The bell tolled. Thomas's chest tightened with fear, but he remembered Reverend Whitmore's words, "Love is stronger than fear." He stayed by Samuel's side, holding his hand, fetching water, and praying through the night. By dawn, Samuel stirred, weak but alive. Thomas realized that the bell's toll was not a sentence. It was a call to act with care and presence. Reverend Whitmore revealed one final secret to Thomas. The bell chose who would ring it. It responded not to death itself, but to the presence of love, care, and compassion. Only when hearts were connected could the bell resonate. Thomas, amazed and humbled, vowed to honor the bell and its purpose for the rest of his life. It was not a tool of fear, it was a teacher, guiding the living toward kindness. One spring morning, Reverend Whitmore announced he would leave Kentucky Ridge to continue his ministry elsewhere. The townspeople mourned quietly, but Thomas understood the lesson. The values taught by the bell were more important than any single presence. Before leaving, the Reverend handed Thomas a small, polished key. "This will let you ring the bell when the ridge needs guidance," he said softly. "Use it wisely, Thomas. Remember its purpose is love. Always love." Thomas clutched the key, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his young shoulders. That winter, a snowstorm trapped travelers in the ridge. One man fell ill, with a fever that grew dangerously high. The bell tolled, echoing across the frozen hills. Thomas, now 13, climbed the belfry and rang the bell himself. Its deep tone called neighbors from their homes, and together they carried the man to the chapel, keeping him warm and fed until the storm passed. That night, Thomas realized the bell's purpose wasn't prophecy. It was action, presence, and care in the moment of need. Years passed. Thomas grew into a young man, and the ridge flourished. The bell continued to toll, but never as a warning. Instead, it reminded everyone that life was fragile, that love and kindness were the true measures of living, and that death, though inevitable, could be softened by compassion. Thomas often told children, "When you hear the bell, don't fear. Listen, love, act." The ridge folk began to see the bell not as a harbinger of doom, but as a teacher, guiding them toward the best of humanity. Decades later, Thomas lay on his deathbed, now a grandfather surrounded by his family. The bell tolled once more, its familiar deep echo rolling over the ridge. Thomas smiled and whispered to his grandchildren, "Every bell you hear isn't the end. It's a reminder to live with love, to care for others, and to cherish every heartbeat." That bell, it saved lives not by warning of death, but by teaching hearts to act. And with that, Thomas passed peacefully, leaving behind a legacy of compassion, courage, and connection. The bell of Bellwood Chapel continued to toll over the hills, not as a harbinger of fear, but as a call to humanity, echoing its message for generations to come.